So I will give you my head, heart, and hands all in, but I'm not going to give you my soul. And we built this movie set, and we dressed the CEO up as a nurse, and we sent him through a storytelling maze.
Bob Schwartz spent over 35 years in some of the most engineering-driven companies on Earth. American Red Cross, Motorola, Procter & Gamble, 12 years at GE Healthcare. He ran the Industrial Designers Society of America for a decade, built design teams across 4 studios in 5 countries, and won 22 IDEA medals along the way. Here's what most design leaders never figure out. Bob did not earn design's seat at the table by talking about design. He walked into GE Healthcare carrying 50 dream catchers and asked executives what their dreams were. He made it about everybody except design.
3,000 people came through that storytelling maze. This introduced design in a new way to the whole company.
Which is exactly what makes the question every hardware design leader gets asked sooner or later land so hard. Let's imagine a world where they've not heard of design thinking, but they lead a hardware business, they're skeptical. How would you convince them?
It is a big question, and the hardest lesson learned is...
Bob said one thing in this conversation that I just keep coming back to.
You cannot implement strategy if people don't trust and respect you.
This conversation is about how design earns its seat in hardware. Not by waving the flag harder, not by selling design to people who do not buy it, but by solving the problem in front of you, by being subversive with goodness in your heart. Bob spent 35 years doing exactly that. This is Why Design. Bob Schwartz, welcome to Why Design. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
No problem at all. It's been a long time in the coming. I must say, I've got to go thank our mutual friend, Claudia Kotchka, for putting us in touch.
Right.
There's been quite a few guests recently that we've had on the show that all thanks to intros from Claudia. So Claudia, if you are listening, thank you so much. Bob, thank you for being on the show. So Bob Schwartz, you've spent over 35 years inside some of the world's most complex hardware organizations, making the case that design is a strategic driver, not just a decoration service. Before we get into how you got there, maybe you could take me back to a room full of 400 GE executives after dinner, a motivational speaker at the front telling everyone to lock arms, close their eyes and chant, "I am GE." Perhaps you could walk us through actually what was going through your head at that moment, because it's not just one of those harmless corporate theatre.
It was one of my favorite dangerous stories in corporate life. And yes, we did have this marvelous dinner. There were 400 GE executives there, and I was honored to be invited. It was relatively early in my time at GE. They had this motivational speaker who primarily coached professional baseball teams, Major League Baseball players. Anyway, this gentleman pacing back and forth started, into his routine and asked us all to stand and lock arms, as you said. And he wanted us to solemnly say, "I am GE, I am GE." And I'm thinking, what the hell is this? I always had this strong sense of, I will give you my head, heart, and hands all in, but I'm not going to give you my soul. And so I started to chant, unlike everyone else, "I am Bob. I am Bob." And the fellows next to me, they're elbowing me, "Shut up, you're going to get fired." And I just kept doing it. And then the guy on the stage heard me, and he's giving me the stink eye, I don't know. Eventually it ended, but I never moved off of "I am Bob." And I really thought I was going to get in big trouble, because there was some, how shall I say, superiors who heard me as well. But they got it in the end. And anyway, I took a risk, and they still kept me employed.
So yeah, you ended up at GE for 12 years after that moment, I think. So
Yeah.
no one pulled you to a side. There was no kind of major ramifications, or were there?
No, no, there weren't. And, some of my colleagues, my friends said, "What are you, crazy?" And,
Hmm.
it's just, trouble is my middle name, with goodness in my heart. And, I'm going to hold on to my soul. And I feel like that's my differentiator.
Hmm.
I'm not going to do things, that I feel like, again, for the right reasons, not arrogant reasons, that are just not appropriate. And I felt this guy was off base. Uh, I understood what he was trying to do, um, but the point was lost on me in the way he was trying to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Did he say anything to you afterwards?
No, he didn't say a word to me.
It's like, that guy's trouble. I'm going to avoid him.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, design leaders in hardware businesses talk about this tension a lot. You can give the company everything, but there's obviously a line, isn't there? You found, well, I say, have you found yours? Is it as simple as, just that public statement? And how do you know when you're getting close to that line?
You know, I'm a great proselytizer, if that's a word, of work-life balance, and one of the most terrible, um, adoptees to work-life balance. Um, when you work in big corporations, and especially if you have responsibility, um, it's a 24/7 gig, especially with technology. You're always on the air, and I traveled constantly all over the country, all around the world. I think I topped out at about 30 countries, some of them many times, and, you just kind of, you know, you try, but you can't always get there. And there's
Mm,
lessons within that I learned to try to get moments of care for myself, but I could have done a better job, in that respect. But I expected the people that worked for me, to do a much better job, and I knew
mm,
I could get more productivity, and I knew I could get more, what's the word, support from my teams, if I helped them have a life that I probably could have had a little more of myself. I was criticized, once by a corporate officer, saying that I took better care of my teams than I took care of myself.
that's
And,
interesting.
he meant that, in a good way, um, but he was also giving me a lesson.
Mm.
Maybe I was appearing a little burned out at the time, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, how have in is that been more apparent in kind of later years in your career? Um, has it refined how you go about kind of leading people and leading yourself?
Yeah, the real key reflection is, and I share this with anybody, is, when my kids were young and I was, working really hard and, trying to do the climb, uh,
Hmm.
and was traveling a lot. And one job I had, in fact, the IDSA job we'll talk about later, required a lot of travel on weekends. You know, um, I don't have any regrets, but, if I could replace something, it would be to recapture some of the time that I lost with my
Hmm.
with my children, um, as a result of the choices I made for my career. And yeah, I moderated, mellowed a little bit, um, and, a lot of it has to do with some of the choices I made post, my corporate career, you know, in the last 5 or 6 years since I left there.
So, anyone listening that's going through that journey, and I know that tension of, you know, you want to do a great job, you want to, keep people happy, you want to succeed in your career, but then you've got your family, so you've got that tension there. Um, what would you say to someone that feels like they've got to do those, but they don't want to lose touch with their family? And maybe what would you say to your younger self to still have a successful kind of globe-trotting career as well?
I guess, maybe I learned later, to keep my soul, and maybe earlier I did, um, and I love the work, and I loved the immensely interesting and privileges I had honors I had to do the things I got to do in my career and still get to do.
Mm.
Um, and sometimes you walk back in the house after a 14-day Asia swing, and someone might say to you, "There's a stranger in my kitchen." That doesn't feel good. So I would advise anybody to do the best you can to live the life the best you can that you're trying to get the people that work for you or work around you to
Mhm.
live. Um, and it's about prioritizing, sequencing, and making choices. And I wish in some cases um, my choices were different because I did work my backside off. And compared to others that I worked around, I was a lightweight compared to some of you know, the really senior, super senior people that I work with.
Mm.
Even though I was an executive in a number of companies, um, who never stopped traveling, who were
Mm.
never I at least had bits of that, and I tried to take it. And when I was home, I, you know, I I still would have, an Asia call or a Europe call, and it would be at
Mm.
nighttime or early in the morning, and there was nothing you could do about that. And so I'd, be locked in my home office at 10 o'clock at night, on a call. And it just was what it.
It's just part of the well, part of the modern world, especially in in manufacturing and design, with international supply chains. But you've got to find that balance, haven't you? And you know, or kind of refine what is important to you really at that time. But it's tricky. Well, look, let's go back to the beginning. To the origin story, to the question in the podcast title, why design? So every designer, every engineer has a reason they chose this path. What was yours, Bob?
You know, I I don't know. I guess there is something to the genetic story. Um, I grew up just naturally always wanting to make things, building things, creating chaos in my father's garage, from a very early age. When I was about 10 years old, my mother had this old school table radio in the kitchen,
Mhm.
and, I just decided to take it apart while it was plugged in. Um,
Huh.
and how many parts could I take away before it stopped working? The
It wasn't
challenge.
battery powered.
Yeah, well, you started pulling components out and eventually it stops. But the challenge was that I couldn't get it to work again when I reassembled it. My mom was not really pleased with me. But from an early age, I had that curiosity, and my grandfather, my mother's father, and my father's father were in their own way creative people. My mother's
Mhm.
father, he was a watchmaker and a jewelry maker and a clock fixer, and he had jobs where he worked with his hands. Some of the jewelry he made was beautiful, and those were, some of it was avocations, but he made a living as
Mhm.
a watchmaker.
Huh.
Um, my father's father was a builder, and way back in the day, he was an immigrant and,
Mhm.
he built houses and then he had other people building houses for him. And then he got rich. Then he lost it all in the depression. And,
Mhm.
it was that my mother was a comedy writer and,
Huh.
she wrote for some fairly important working comedians and jazz singers and Broadway people. And she wrote plays with a partner. Um, so I always sort of had that around me. Um, I wasn't a particularly, motivated, student in middle and high school, but I was always in the art room. And,
Mm.
at high school on Saturdays, grew up near New York City. I went to New York City and I went to the Art Students League of New York and the New School, as they then called it, which is now part of Parsons. And I took classes there as a high school kid.
Huh.
And my destiny was to go to art design school. And that's what I did. What few people know is that when I declared my major after the freshman year, I declared it as sculpture, um,
Okay.
because I wasn't ready to sell out to the man in those times, um, go into design, and I was in sculpture for 2 weeks and transferred into design because that's where I knew I belonged and never looked back.
So yeah, you sold sold a little bit out by the sounds of it, but it was the right path.
Okay, it's okay.
Yeah. And I suppose you probably came around to doing sculpture, but maybe in a 3D digital format at some point in your career, you know.
Right.
So
No, I was just trying to be a thought I could be a starving artist, and I was kidding myself. I mean, I knew, even from all the art classes I had that design was my future, but it was the times we were in, and,
yeah,
I
you're a
don't know.
professional rebel, even back then.
Right.
So that was all leading. That was the seed that led to the Iron Bob all those years later. So um, amazing. So you started your career fairly early on at the IDSA as well, didn't you? So you spent quite a few years there. Perhaps you could talk us through how that came about, and what was the IDSA like when you arrived, and what were you what did you turn it into, and what was your mission there?
Well, actually, listen, let me jump back for a quick second into,
Yeah.
my work in graduate school at the Rhode
Okay.
Island School of Design. When I was there was a funded project from the American Red Cross to redesign how blood was collected on blood mobiles. I don't know if you've ever given blood or our
Mm.
listeners. I was asked as part of my teaching assistantship to run that project, and I did so because I needed the money. Um, and I ran that project, and it turned into a job offer at the American Red Cross. They'd never had a designer before.
Okay.
I worked in the Red Cross in Washington D.C. area for a long, relatively long time, and so I started to get sort of the design leader manager thing as a punk kid,
Mhm.
in my 20s. Eventually, I started to do things that had to do with healthcare policy just by
Mm.
happenstance. It actually was driven by the AIDS pandemic, and there was no test for HIV at the time, and the
Mm.
safety of the blood supply was at risk. So we did a project using the way designers think and our tools to show how you could collect and test blood in fewer places and bring quality up um, in order to increase the safety of the blood supply. So I sort of got into that, and anyway, what this led to was an offer to work for what's now called AdvaMed, which in the US is the uh, lobbying organization for the medical device industry. And I went
Mm.
there and I became a registered lobbyist. And I tell you that because these two experiences set me up when the job to be executive director of the IDSA came about. It set me up because I had some business side, I had some you know, government advocacy stuff, under my belt and design. And anyway,
Mm.
so I went there and I spent 10 years, a decade at IDSA, and some wonderful things happened. Design wasn't as much in the business lexicon as it became, and we were fortunate enough to have, Business Week magazine, which I think is now called
Mm.
Bloomberg Business Week, take notice one year of our IDEA Awards, which are now called the International
Mm.
Design Idea Excellence Awards. Um, and they published a cover story about design. And I was new at IDSA, and one of our team members said to me, you should call those guys and tell them we have this program, and maybe they want the exclusive right to publish. So, our board chair, who was Peter Bressler, a dear friend, and I flew to New York, and we met with these big shots at Business Week at McGraw Hill in this big tower. And for some reason, we talked them into giving us $50,000 a year, giving us $50,000 a year so they could have the first right to publish the Idea Awards. And this went on for years and years. And actually, at its height, they published cover stories and 18 column stories, which is huge in a
Wow.
magazine about the Idea Awards. And suddenly business was talking about design to business.
Mm.
And we certainly had a voice we didn't have before, thanks to them. And thanks actually in a great part to um, one of the associate managing editors, Bruce Nussbaum, who was long left there, um, who became a dear friend to design and brought that story forward. So that was sort of the genesis of that. And what happened was IDSA was a small, relatively small, but storied institution. But what happened is people started to come to us because somebody else
Oh,
was telling our story for us. It wasn't us waving our hands over our heads. And money began to flow and opportunities open and more global things began to happen. And it sort of changed the fortunes of IDSA. We built a nice financial reserve that the institution had never had, and had international conferences we'd never seen before. And it just changed the dialogue and created a bit of a pendulum swing across the profession and the industry. So that was that. It was tremendously rewarding. I spent a decade there,
uh-huh,
and I learned. Um, One of the things I learned about is traveling on weekends, for 10 years. But what I really learned there is the value of creating strong networks. And
uh-huh.
later in my career, when I needed that, I could dial up a lot of people and say, "Hey, I need your help." And this happened to be when I lost a job a long time ago. Um, and and that for me was a sort of a life story part that I took with me as I departed there, but tremendously um, rewarding to be an advocate for the profession that I
Mm.
loved.
Let me interrupt for 30 seconds with something most hardware founders learn the hard way. The skills that get you from prototype to product are not the same skills that get you from product to scale. That transition is where leadership matters. At Kodu, we help physical product companies hire senior leaders who can formalize roadmaps, build world-class teams, and align product with commercial strategy. Director, VP, C-suite. If you are entering a new category, raising capital, or professionalizing your product function, this is not a hire to rush. So find me, Chris Whyte, on LinkedIn, and let's talk before you make the call. That's amazing. Yeah, to be part of that kind of transformational time of IDSA as well, because it's the organization, it's synonymous with industrial design. Obviously it's half of the title there, but it seems like every other American designer or studio that I'm connected with, they are affiliated. It's
Yeah.
still a big deal here, but you were right there at the so the start, but there's a big transformation there, wasn't there? And I imagine there's plenty of people listening that can point to that publication and the IDSA, having transformed their businesses and their fortunes as well. Yeah, that's really cool. So, talk us through the next briefly few hires. And I want to dive into the networking bit. And I mean, you looked at looks like you spent 3.5 years at Motorola during the late 90s, early noughties. That must have been quite an exciting time as well, because that was still when there was actually genuine design going on in and innovation going on in mobile phones before Apple came and made everything basically a slab, a very very
Yeah.
useful, clever slab. But yeah, we say about the value of creating networks. Perhaps you could talk to give us that case study. Where that actually came into play.
So, in the later part of my time at IDSA, I began to get some opportunities. Also, my kids were getting older, and I had to start to think about were they gonna go to university? Where was I gonna get the money for that? You
Uh-huh.
work for a nonprofit. I was always paid fairly, but you're not gonna get rich. Um, and so I started to think about maybe it was time in my career to move forward. And there were opportunities out there, and Motorola was one of them. Um, and they didn't make it easy interview wise. The
Uh-huh.
person that I knew who invited me to apply, um, Bruce Claxton, I'd known for years, a dear friend. Um, but all the people around him in Motorola, they wanted to talk to me 14 times before saying, "All right, let's hire this guy to be a design leader." Um, we, that time period in Motorola was really interesting because they created and dominated the mobile phone business. We
Mm,
did part of that. Um, Most of the work that I did was consumer, government, industrial communications stuff.
mm,
We did things for first responders, things for retail, things for people in on freight trains. Um, we also did consumer products. You remember cordless telephones, um, things like that. We did the mobile phones for something that was introduced in this country, at least, called Nextel. It was a mobile phone with
mm,
a walkie-talkie in it, and it was
Okay.
used in industrial settings, and they were really fun to play with. But it was the first one where you could do a national conversation, you know, uh, that wasn't the 10-mile range or 2-mile range of a walkie-talkie, um, and not pay cellular telephone charges, mobile phone charges. At any rate, Nokia came along and took Motorola out,
Yeah.
because
Hmm.
Motorola, for reasons that made sense at the time, thought this was a business tool. Nokia came along and said, "No, this is a lifestyle product." And, it was in the
mm,
early days, really early days. And now 5-year-olds have mobile phones. Um,
mhm.
and, um, anyway, so that created some chaos in the company, and it went through some serious changes, and then Apple came along and took Nokia out, uh, essentially from market share, and you know the rest of the story, for
Yeah.
sure. Um,
Absolutely.
so,
You're
we went through that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going before we kind of move away from it. So we went from IDSA and non-profit. I'm guessing not designing there. You're not flexing your design muscles in the traditional sense because it's a collective group as opposed to a design house. That for a lot of people they find that transition, and especially you spent 10 years there, but you still there's kind of the start of your career in the grand scheme of things. So, and most of it had been for non-profits. What was the question or the response, or what was the factor that enabled you to move from non-profit to industry, and certainly for a big, well-known brand, because that trips a lot of people up.
So, yeah, it's true. I mean, there were some conversations I had with companies where I had difficulty convincing them that I understood how to be in a manufacturing company. Um, the key in Motorola was leadership. And I had shown, I guess, adequate or hopefully better than adequate leadership in helping IDSA sort of come into daylight in the way it had been before.
Mhm,
Obviously, takes a team. It wasn't just me. Um, and I think ultimately, it was a design leadership job that they had there. I had been working at the nexus of design around the world.
mhm,
Uh, I knew everybody. I traveled everywhere. I was at 50 college and university campuses. I, scores and scores and scores of design offices, on and on and on. Been overseas, etc. So, I had a context. I went to 6 years of design school. I
mhm,
practiced design at the American Red Cross for quite a period of time before that. Uh, but ultimately, where I got through the door was as a leader, as a design leader.
mhm.
And this was about managing the team. And that's, I think, the senior executive that I had to convince in the end. That was the head nod, that put him across the finish line. And, don't think for a minute that I didn't struggle. Yes, I feel like I know how to work with people, and I learn every day how to work with people. Um, but at the same time, the complexities and the technologies and the manufacturing processes, that was a hill climb, and I made
Mm,
mistakes. I mean, fortunately, I had good support, around me and above me, and there were obviously plenty of other, vertical leaders who didn't have patience for that. Um, but nonetheless, it was a hill climb, and you take to it or you die, and I guess I took to it.
Yeah, I'd say so. 3.5 years, certainly isn't a flash in the pan, is it? So, And then that was it then, wasn't it, really, in terms of that got you into industry, into manufacturing, and then
Yeah.
you went off and did a year at Newell Rubbermaid, spent a good time at P&G, and then obviously 12 and a bit years at GE Healthcare. So, um, yeah, it's I think that's going to be, yeah, reassuring for people. Yeah, especially going from maybe academia, maybe like say non-profits, that focusing on what the job's actually about, not what they're necessarily what the business is making. So, Brill, sorry, I cut across you. So, did you want to finish a point, or shall I ask you another question?
So, fundamentally, all through that, the hardest lessons to learn were lessons about leadership, and lessons about behaviors, lessons
Mm,
about how to adapt and accommodate to the continuously changing environment in corporate life or any leadership job. Um, and, you know, these pendulum swings happen constantly, you know, in GE, for example, I had 7 managers in the first 10
uh-huh.
years, 2 of them twice in different r than when they were in different roles. They're all corporate officers. Um,
Mhm.
and, some of them looked you in the face and say, "Why am I managing? Why am I why do you report to me? Why does design report to me? I don't get it." I mean, at one point, I reported to a German radiologist who happened to be hired as the chief medical officer and chief technology officer. He had no idea, even though he was a great guy, brilliant guy, he had no idea why the design organization of 60 people and me, uh, in all our studios reported to him. And I had other managers like that. I would need maybe a strong beer to tell you some of those stories. But the fundamental that I wanted to get to was it's really learning that those changes on their face isn't what's important. It's learning
Mm,
how to adjust behaviors so that you can continue to do the work you wanna do in spite of the fact
mhm.
that there's this constant churn. There's a bad quarter and it's Schwartz. I need $400,000 from your budget and I need you to lay off 3 people. And knowing not to knee jerk and do that right away. And to help your leaders become better leaders and understand what the critical things are about making it about everybody else, not yourself.
Mm.
I could go on and
Um,
on and on about leadership learn, and you'll ask me questions and I'll tell you more.
yeah, and I know, when we spoke previously, you're in the process of writing a book, or certainly got loads of kind of key lessons from your kind of your career, and we're kind of touching on the edges of some of those. So I don't want it to give everything away, but let's talk about your time at P&G. It sounds like they gave you unlimited budget to build Clay Street and a global design thinking practice. You know, what do you actually do with that kind of mandate, and what did you learn about the design thinking program that needs to work at real scale?
So, just to be clear, I was had the opportunity to join P&G at this wonderful time where the chairman and CEO recognized that design was being used as a strategic tool by other companies. You know who they are, the BMWs, the Nikes, the
Hmm.
Apples. Where he learned it, though, was when he was posted in Japan. The great A.G. Lafley was posted in Japan, and he was running P&G's beauty care business, and he was seeing how Japanese beauty businesses were using design as a differentiator. That, uh, design without a strategy was just decoration. That sort of
Uh-huh.
got in his head. So when he became chairman of General excuse me, Procter& and Gamble, gotta keep my company straight. When he became chairman, he wanted to add that. He believed that innovation came from everywhere, from every discipline,
Uh-huh.
not just engineering or whatever, and that everybody was responsible for it, and he didn't have the kind of design organization he saw when he was in Asia.
Uh-huh.
So he asked Claudia Kotchka, who is an incredible leader, who had been there for a very long time, was not a designer, had a marketing, finance, kind of background, to build him a design organization, pretty much open checkbook. And you've seen this a few times. The great my friend Mauro Porcini went to PepsiCo and was able to do that
Yeah.
because the CEO understood it. Now he's at Samsung, and they understand it, and he's really bringing it there, um, and bless him for it. But he understands that it's about people, and it was a lesson that I was fortunate enough to learn at the time. Anyway, Claudia was tasked with this responsibility. Um, it just so happened that I was uh, looking for a job at that time. I'll spare you the details, but I talked my way in there enough. And what I was able to convince her of is that I understood and had a big network, how to build a global design organization. And so I was brought in to work on the corporate side to, among many other people, to help um, build this large organization. There were 60 people
Wow.
about there, and we grew it to 400 in a short period of time. Hiring 50 people a year into design, building out all the teams for all the vertical businesses, um, and it was really great. At one point, I said to her, "Look, I need better context. I need for you to put me into one of these businesses as the design leader, these billion-dollar brands, so that I
Wow.
have better context, uh, and I wanna be in a brand that's challenged, in the market." And, um, and so I was asked to go into the P&G pet care business, uh, you know, Iams and Eukanuba cat food, dog food. I'd never worked in anything like that, but all the principles were the same. And there was a branding challenge. Some of the big brands that they were competing with were cloning what they were doing. Those brands that P&G had moved from specialty into big box food, drug, mass markets, and and then the other big brands just jump right in. This is a multi-billion
Wow.
dollar business. Anyway, so we did that sort of thing. Um, but Clay Street happened along the way. And those of us who were there at the time were fortunate enough to be sent by Claudia to the Stanford D School, and where they were teaching design thinking. And we all became design thinking, took the 40-hour course and the design thinking facilitation program. The deal was that we had to come back and do at least 2 design thinking workshops for rest of parts of the business in the next year, which we were glad to do. Um, they bought a building. They hired David Keeler, fantastic design thinker that I think he was at Mattel at the time, and doing some of that stuff with Barbie and who else. And and he came along, and that was built. I got to spend 3 months working on a project for the pet care business at Clay Street, and we were cloistered away to reinvent the brand. And
Wow.
it was a remarkable experience, and they did hundreds of projects following that. And I could tell you more about
Amazing.
P&G. Ask me more questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to go back to something you mentioned a few times, actually, what we've been talking about. Convincing people. You've kind of, I wouldn't say, muscled your way into opportunities. You've convinced people to give you a chance. At various points in your career, and it's paid off. Um, what would you say to anyone listening to this? That's like this design thinking. Let's imagine a world where they've not heard of design thinking. But they lead a hardware business, they're skeptical. How would you convince them? What would you say um, to give it a try? Where should they look? What wins would you point to, which make it a no brainer to implement it into your organization?
Ah, the
That's a
hardest
big
lesson.
question.
It is a big question, and the hardest lesson learned is you got to make it about everybody else. You have to make it about them, not you, not design. You can't walk in waving your hands over your head, talking about how great you are and how great Schwartz is and how great things you learned when you worked at this company or that company. No. And the story I'll share, and it happened to be a GE story, and I knew better, but I still did it. I was making the rounds of the C-suites when I first went there as a design, corporate design leader, chief design officer, la di da. I just come from P&G, learned a ton, couldn't have done the GE job without what I learned at GE. And I'm sitting with this guy who's running this very large particular business, and I'm doing exactly that. I'm talking about how great design is and all the things I did in my career. And I could see he was getting red faced. And then I could see he was clenching his fist, and I'm still running at the mouth. And like I said, I knew better. Suddenly he pounds his fist on his desk. And I don't know if in this podcast I can use some of his French language that he spoke. He said to me, "God damn it, Schwartz, you don't get it. I need cash now. Do you understand me? I don't have time for this fluffy bunny shit." And that's exactly what he said to me. He said, "You show me how to get cash now, and maybe I'll talk to you about this design nonsense. Now get the hell out of my office." And that's exactly what he did. And shame on me for being an executive with a lot of experience and going down that rabbit hole. Um, and I guess I got full of myself in that moment. So um, I reconnected. We circled back. The short story is 3 years later, he comes running into the US studio where my office happened to be. "Where's Schwartz? Where are the signature elements on that machine?" I won't say what business. And we had him. Because what I forgot to remember is I had to make it about him and his business and the challenges he was having and how I could help him solve those challenges. And the lesson is when you do that and you're successful using the tools you know how to use to help them, they begin to tell your story for you. And you don't have to do it so much. It's the business week lesson. That's where I learned it. Once a business magazine, they thought we were helping them, started to talk about design to business, everything changed. And, and I used that all along the way, except in this one instance later in my career, and I relearned the lesson. So, circling back to your question, and that is if you're aspiring to be or are a design leader, do everything you can to make it about who you're doing work for. Yes, you do it with your own team, but you make it about everybody else, not yourself. And that by along with the work you're going to do and the sweat equity you're going to put in, it tells the story for you and things happen and people
Wow.
develop trust and respect. And I've been called a lot of names in my career by people who didn't know managers. He's a cowboy. He's a self promoter. You know, they work over there in the country club. The design studio that look different than the columns and rows of everybody else's office space.
They
Um,
don't wear ties.
so,
Yeah. So maybe reframe that scenario then. If you had your time again, how would you, go in, you're a new design exec with an organization, you go around the C-suite, what are you asking them? What are you kind of going in with there rather than the propaganda, the design propaganda, so to speak?
well, what I did with my team and everybody up the food chain that I worked with, because we're designers, we do things differently, and they see us immediately as from another planet. Is I bought about 50 or 60 Native American dream catchers. You know what a dream catcher is?
Yeah,
For those of you who don't, look it up. Anyway, the notion of a dream capture is nightmares get caught in the net of the dream catcher, and the good dreams pass through. And as the sun rises, the nightmares fade away. And so my premise before I arrived was to have dream catchers distributed to everybody on my team and everybody I work for and all the leaders of all the businesses. And I asked the question, "What are your dreams?" That's how I came in.
yeah.
And that got me a fair distance in the early going because they sort of took notice, like, who is this screwball? And what is this? What was interesting when I did arrive, I found those dream catchers hanging on the walls of many of my team members and some of the leaders that I worked with and worked for.
Oh, amazing.
So it was a question of changing the conversation from uh, this is a very well-respected creative resource in the company,
Mhm.
but it wasn't considered strategic. Um, the other thing I began doing, and maybe we talked about this, is Yes, we were Global Design, but I sub-branded it, um, that we were strategic drivers of organic business growth.
Uh-huh.
The laughter down the hallways was crazy. "What are you talking about?" "No, design, we're driving business growth." Because, mostly design had been receiver of projects and very well respected for the wonderful work that it had always done. I mean, back in the, when X-ray machines were just invented, there were 70 years of design in GE Healthcare
Uh,
existed before I got there. And there were people who were there, like people who were there that had been there for 30 years for half of that. Um, but we needed to change the conversation and make design part of business and become business partners and maybe begin to build some strands of DNA there. The other thing that was pivotal is I needed to find a big leader with a problem that they couldn't solve. Um, and I did find one and a chief marketing officer for one of the businesses I won't mention. And he was trying to I don't want to say he was trying to create a branding strategy. He wasn't trying to create a nomenclature strategy for all the products. He was trying to do something larger that he couldn't quite define. And he hired an outside consultant and spent more than $1 million and got 500 PowerPoint slides back. And the CEO looked at him and said, "Okay, so," and he was getting nowhere. So I told him that we could build an environment, and this is something we did at Procter and Gamble, and it's the design thinking principle of show, don't tell. And I literally convinced this guy to give me a large sum of money in 5 weeks, and I hired an agency in Cincinnati that we had used in Procter and Gamble to build these environments. They were storytelling environments that you would bring executives through, and it would bring to life the present, the competitive set, and the future.
uh,
Anyway, we did this. I cleared out one of the two studios and packed everybody into the remaining one that was on fun. And we built this movie set, and we dressed the CEO up as a nurse, and we sent him through a storytelling maze. And in his hands, he had 3 cards that had challenges that we knew he was facing, that had to do with this thing that this CMO was trying to do. I don't want to get too oblique. Anyway, he went through the sea of sameness, and he went through the blue ocean period, and he saw what other companies were doing. At the end of the story maze, he was faced with a tree, and on the tree there were all these cards hanging that had solutions on them. He could make choices based on what he learned. Well, those choices had to do with what this guy was trying to sell him, and he's standing there in his nurse's uniform. I could have gotten fired right then. Um, and he picked some of them; they were quite obvious. And he turned to this CMO and he said, "Well, we're doing this." The CMO got promoted. I kept my job, and 3,000 people came through that storytelling maze in the succeeding several months. This introduced design in a new way to the whole company. It was being subversive with goodness in our hearts. Um, and we tried something that was totally it looked like it was under the radar, but I found one leader with a big problem to solve. We made it about him, and we used the tools that we knew how to use that I learned, frankly, at Procter& Gamble, and it changed the storyline. And that just kind of launched us off into a
Yeah.
convincing not everybody. I always had my antagonists, but many businesses became partners in a new way.
Yeah.
And a few started to have some DNA strands about design in them.
Yeah.
More
So
than you
you've gone
probably
from
want to.
absolutely, yeah. We could I know from our prep call we could span this over a whole series, with the stories you've got, Bob. But just to say you went going from cowboy and loose cannon to recognition like that, winning 22 idea medals, fast company, corporate design, stronghold recognition, leading global studios. So do you remember a point where you felt like it had landed, when you felt like you're being taken seriously?
Yeah, there's a photo that somebody took, and I was leaning against the wall in our design thinking studio, which we called Menlo, after Thomas Edison's Menlo Park Industrial Research Lab, the very first one. And
huh.
Edison, by the way, Design thinking's not new. He was doing that 120, 130 years ago. They yes-anded their way through 10,000 filaments before they got one that worked for a light bulb. It's not new. They called it something different. Um, at any rate, we used Menlo as our theme, and we had a giant picture of Edison, and next to it said, "Hell, there's no rules here. We're trying to accomplish something," which is what he
Mhm.
said. And we actually created a type font out of his handwriting, and it was the one we used around the design thinking studio. Um,
Oh, amazing.
Not the question you asked, but it was at that point, and maybe it was about 8 years in. We had been doing some great things, but I realized at that point that we were really starting to do something. And I had all these different
Mhm.
managers, and the business kept changing, and you know, Medicare changed, which is the reimbursement model in this country, and international politics changed. But we really started to get some real DNA strands. We had,
Mm.
another story here is we didn't have money. Um, and when I went there and my boss, wonderful guy, asked me for a 90-day plan, typical, and also asked me for a strategic plan. And basically, we laid out columns and rows. Here's all the projects we're working on. Here are the
Mhm.
timelines. Here's the money. I need 19 people to do these things. We had studios in different countries. The studios were not up to date facilities. I wanted to
Mhm.
rebuild them all. And then the 2008 economic crisis happened, and I got nothing. Um, but again, serendipity and knowing how to leverage it
Mhm.
is, you got to be careful here talking about what we did. But
Yeah.
one of the other GE businesses came to us and said, "We're trying to design the next thing for the future." It was pretty pretty complicated, and
Mm.
I think I can say it. It was GE Aviation, and they were, the world was moving into glass cockpits, which, by the way, at first were pictures on the screen of the analog instruments they always had. That was how they made the transition. It's different now. Uh, but they paid us a great deal of money to do this project for them. And my team were flying around on airplanes and in jump seats, and it was amazing work. And we learned a lot about healthcare, working in another world, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, at any rate, then other parts of the business started to ask us if we could do some work for them. And then we started to really start hauling in money. And at one point, it started to show up um, in the books of GE Healthcare as a revenue, because we got
Mm.
up to like $2 million a year in revenue. I rebuilt all the studios around the world. We worked with the great Chuck Pelly, and for those youngins who don't know who he is, look him up. He founded Design Works, which is now BMW Design Works. And actually, I was in Hawaii with him last week and his wife.
Oh, amazing.
We hired him and his partner, who has happened to be his wife, not to do a design language for GE Healthcare. It had never been done before, um, but to coach our smart team so that they could do it and mentor them. And we had a long association, and I paid for that with money we were getting from all these different GE businesses. So we wound up with new studios, a design thinking facility, a design language which we got to present at 30 Rock to GE corporate people. There's never been one before in terms of physical design. We obviously were starting to do more user interfaces, and that became a thing. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't know, some of it was dumb luck and timing. Some of it was, being able to see around corners and find
Mhm.
opportunities where it didn't look like there were any. Um, and eventually they got smart enough and realized that we were bringing in this money, and they started to take it, some of it
Yeah.
from us, uh, which was fine. Um,
Yeah.
but our base budget built up every year because it was always based on the previous budget, and we had all this other money uh, that showed up, and we were starting to show up in the profit line a little tiny bit.
And it's amazing to think that it all comes back to solving problems, being helpful, thinking about their problems, not kind of what you've got to offer. You can apply that to any walk of life, really, but we've had some great success there. Before we dive back in, this one is for founders and CEOs building physical products. If you're thinking about hiring a VP of product, chief product officer, or head of R&D, this is not just another hire. It defines how your roadmap is set, how your teams are built, and how your company competes. At Codu, we specialize in securing senior product and engineering leaders for hardware businesses entering their next stage of growth. Focused, discreet, high consequence. If that decision is on your horizon, find me, Chris Whyte, on LinkedIn, and let's talk it through. You've talked about building teams. You've hired a lot of people, over the years. So, covering 4 studios in 5 countries, covering ID, human factors, interaction design, UX, UI, brand, social anthropology. What, in your opinion, Bob, in your experience, what does genuinely excellent hardware design leadership actually look like? And how do you evaluate it in a hire that you've committed, before you've committed to someone?
When I've had the experience of hiring many, many people in my career, if I have a chance to interview them, they've already given the table stakes. We know that they can design. Otherwise, they wouldn't have come in for us all to interview. What I'm looking for is the chemical stuff. Are the lights on? It's the interpersonal things. If people don't trust and respect you, they won't want to work with you. And somebody who doesn't know how to represent themselves and tell a story, and extend a certain level of humility while extending great confidence, and having a balance of those two, knowing how they're going to fit into the team and everybody's a leader. I don't care if you're fresh out of school and we hire you, you're a leader in a certain way. And you're bringing things we don't have. That's why you're hired. And so there's leadership there. And, I learned, because I learned this in P&G in particular, not to be afraid to put somebody who's right out of school in front of corporate officers presenting work they did, as opposed to their manager or me going in and presenting it, because that's what's supposed to be done. Senior leaders love that. They love that, unless they're not very good senior leaders. And every time we pulled that, it's their work. They did a great job. They did the whole backstory. We got to do the research sometimes and not just name that tune. The worst thing that can happen is when you're told, give it to me now, give it to me fast. And you have, they leapt to an idea. They don't know what the problem is we're really trying to solve, but there's a technology there, or there's an imperative competitively. And, how are you going to differentiate yourself? It's just skin it and ship it. Make it pretty. Hate that. Designers hate that. And sorry, I showed my teeth, but I have very strong feelings about that. So
so will many people listening.
Yeah, being able to contextualize things, and when they don't give you the time to do it, still do it. That's the sweat equity part. You give them what the business is asking for, what they think they're asking for, and then alongside it, give them something they never dreamed was possible. And we did a lot of that. We did it in Motorola. We did it in Procter and Gamble. We did it in GE, P&G. In design, we always tried to do that. And another lesson that I learned, and it required sweat equity on our part. They're not going to pay for it, but show them what it could be, not what they think they want. And that had influence in terms of, it was a little seed of thinking. And in a small percentage of time, that became the project. And that happened a couple of times across my career, not every time, but it informed where we went next, and it got us more respect, and it showed that we were serious. The other thing it showed is that we were showing up as business people in the context of our discipline every single day. Great P&G lesson there.
Mhm.
You know, if you ask them, oh, well, I'm a business person in marketing, I'm a business person in this or in sales, whatever. Designers are business people. And if they neglect to understand that, they're not making it about everybody else. You're not solving their problem. They need cash now, remember?
Yeah. Absolutely. And the sweat equity side, giving them something that, they can't possibly imagine they'd get, does that, have you seen that manifest itself often at interview? You bring people in and they surprise you with something that you hadn't asked for.
As you can tell, I don't know, I'm a natural storyteller because of who I grew up with. That was my mom.
Hmm.
She was a writer. She was a storyteller, and I don't know, I guess I inherited some of that. Um, and, um, and my initials are BS, so that's another problem. You don't have to put that in the podcast unless you want. Uh, but what I look for is somebody who can come in and represent themselves and verbalize and visualize at the same time in a balance. Um, why should we hire you? And if they can't, and they're looking at the wall, or they can't articulate, yes, everybody's nervous, and we're all scared little bunny rabbits, in those circumstances. But help make somebody comfortable, help them see that they can guide the interview, um, and that they're among people who want to be their friends,
Hmm.
but won't be. Um, those are the things, those qualities that I look for. Some people would say those are soft qualities. It's the fluffy bunny stuff, but you can't. And I've been disparaged by some for this, and arguments with others. But you cannot implement strategy if people don't trust and respect you. And if you can build relationships in balance with the strategic objectives you have, it's much easier. You can run around with a hammer, you know, you can leave a trail of bodies, you can be a hard ass, you can be a jerk, but you're not going to get the respect of people behind your back, that you can get if you invest the time to try to build relationships, even with people who don't like you, or leaders who don't have time for you. Convert them into calling you names, into being your greatest agent. And, I'm not the only person who's ever figured that out, but I learned that from some
Mm,
great mentors that I've had the privilege to have.
amazing. And on the still on topic of hiring, perhaps we could talk about wrong hires, because everyone's got, you have to make a few wrong hires throughout your career. Has there been a wrong hire that's actually cost you personally, or where you've misjudged someone's character or capability and the team's paid for it?
Yeah. Some people can put on a good show. Um, some people have themselves in mind, but they're very convincing. Then they don't perform, or they're all talk, no action. And yeah, I've made that mistake. The hiring process, what do you have? A few 1 hour sessions with people,
Uh-huh.
especially at the junior level. And then, at the senior level, and you can find out that some people aren't what they represent, um, and they don't deliver, or they're nasty. Uh, you know, they smile at you because you're their boss, or they're their peer colleague, and then they treat everybody terribly. Um,
Uh,
and, I've worked with people who only believe that the thing to do is to be like a dog with a bone, and you don't care who you beat up. You don't care who you disparage. You only care about the project you have and delivering it your way or the highway.
uh-huh.
And, fine. They don't last long. They think they do. And maybe they'll squeeze 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then that's the end. Either they can't stand it or the company can't stand it, and I've seen
Uh-huh.
this over and over and over again. Every dog gets his due, and what goes around comes around. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way, but in most cases, a bad leader is smelled out.
Uh-huh.
And especially one who behaves in a way that isn't about influencing people and helping move the business along because people really want to work for them.
So what have you learned, in terms of from those mistakes? And it sounds like, yeah, some of those will kind of several years down the line, it might be a realization that something wasn't right. But is there a tool or a technique you use at interview to hopefully sniff some of those bad eggs out?
So I learned about from one of the great HR managers I had, and there weren't many, but I had some really wonderful ones who weren't interested in HR. They were interested in organizational growth and people development and that sort of thing. About the CAR model, CAR, context, action, and results. And it's really hard to dodge um, if the three-legged stool of the context, action, and
Hmm.
result at one or two are missing. So, if someone was being hired to be a designer or even a leader,
Hmm.
I would want to hear them tell me stories and give me the context of whatever the situation was, because it might be a
Hmm.
personnel or a business situation, the action that they took. Because you remember, it takes a team, it takes a village. Um, and then what were the tangible results? What happened?
Hmm.
And if they can do that in a way that shows me they actually thought about it, and can articulate it, that's a win. And I want to hear a couple of those stories. If
Yeah.
they're not doing that and they're tripping over their words or they're going off on tangents, and it's
Uh-huh.
clear to me that they didn't do it, that there was a group that did it or somebody else did it, and in some cases I knew about the work. If they were coming from a big company and it's a product, no, you didn't do that by yourself. Um, I usually use that as kind of a you know, a screen, at least for
Hmm.
me, and I learned it to be very effective because I can yes and questions on top of the things they're telling me,
Hmm.
and say, "Well, wait a minute," or tell me more. If they can't tell you more, or it
Yeah.
sounds like obvious baloney, um, then you understand what's happening.
Yeah, and it's one letter away from the STAR technique that we will coach candidates on. Situation, task, actions, results. It's all about, give us that context around, what happened, and you know what did you do, and what were the results. Um, but competency based questions. Tell me about a time when, or tell me about a
Right.
problem you solved. It's so
Or
that's the
you play the 5 whys,
yeah.
you know, and you keep asking why,
Yeah,
different work, but eventually you get to
absolutely.
the root of it, and you see what they do with it.
Absolutely, yeah. Bro, well, look, we've darted off my script quite a bit. We've actually covered quite a lot. So I'd say that before we click record, I've got like 45 questions, Bob, that I wanted to cover. I think you've answered probably about 39, 40 of them just in
Good.
the way that the conversation's gone. So, which is great. But perhaps you could talk to me about what's next. What are you excited about? You're now working with nonprofits in Wisconsin, an arts and design college, an organization supporting disabled children and College Possible. You correct me if I get any of this wrong, but you're helping underserved students into higher education. So you've gone from full circle, really. Non-profits into big corporate, into helping out the underdogs. So these are obviously very different to medical imaging equipment and FMCG, but you said to me you're applying the same tools. So perhaps you could talk us through which ones and what surprised you about how well they translate.
So, um, some will argue, but they're not different. They're all the same. There is a wide thread that runs through every single one of them, and it's what I talked about in the beginning. It's about your own behavior. It's about knowing how to adapt the tools that you know how to use or you learn into other situations. And, it's another world, but, the business has to be successful. People have to know how to work. People have to be set up for success. There's all those quantum qualities. Strategies have to be developed
Mhm.
and executed. Um, and the way, as designers, we learned how to think, um, those tools are very effective in all these different situations. So, I mean, we talked, a fair bit about things that I learned along the way about being subversive with goodness in your heart, making it about everybody else, being a little, um, re- we didn't talk about recruiting the army you don't control, those kinds of things. Those are principles, through hard knocks that you accumulate if you want to keep doing and keep rising, if you're crazy enough to want to do that. Um, but for me, yeah, I had an opportunity right out of graduate school, and I wound up working in nonprofit. Um, and then I moved into corporate life for a couple of decades. Um, and I was always in support of higher education, usually with the company's money. We had interns, we supported projects, you know, all that sort of thing. Um, but there came a time when it was time to leave corporate life. I was provided or offered, as many were before GE broke up, a shiny red balloon. I had been giving them out, and one was put in front of me. You could say no, but the story may not end in the same way. Anyway, I took the shiny red balloon, um, took a while to reflect. I had already been teaching at Northwestern University near Chicago, um, in a program called in a program called Master of Product Design and Development Management, which had been around for 20 years, started by the great Walter Herbst from Herbst Lazar Bell. The youngins, if you don't know about them, look it up. Um, one of the biggest design firms in the world before there was an IDO. Um, at any rate, Walter Herbst had started this program, and it was like getting a master's degree, you know, together about engineering, business, and design as an amalgam. Anyway, I was on their advisory board. I shot my mouth off about you're not teaching these rising managers about experiences like I had. The sort of business case thing only goes so far. It's about how you're
Mhm.
going to survive as a global corporate leader, design, or anything else. So I got the all right, big shot, go ahead and write us a syllabus and teach that class. So I created a course called Global Leadership in a Smart and Connected World, which I taught there for 4 or 5 years. Anyway, I was doing that. COVID came right on the heels of my departure. GE closed its campus on the day that I was sitting there with a cardboard box. Nobody was there when I left. Um, but I wound up teaching that remotely until COVID went away. So I was already moving into academia. Um,
Mhm.
I decided to set up 3 different profiles on Indeed.com, a corporate, a consultant, and an academic. And the first thing that I got uh, through the box was the opportunity to be a dean at an all-women's Catholic university that was 112 years old. What does
Perfect.
that have to do with design? You tell me. Uh, I knew about this institution where there was 19 languages, 11 faiths, including no faith, 15 distinct cultures, founded in 1913 to educate immigrant women in poverty. I was all over it. And we had been asked years before by somebody who was on their board, who was a GE executive, to teach them design thinking. And so some of them knew who I was, and it was to be dean of the schools of arts, design, and business. So, okay. Anyway, short story is they hired me, and I'd never been a dean before. I'd never worked full time in academia before, but I figured all the tools are the same. And yeah, you get eaten alive for a while, but my fellow deans for the other discipline areas were very supportive, and I survived. A new president came, and I decided to mess with her mind on the first time I met with her. I had nothing to lose, and she, some months later, said, "I want you to come work for me, and I'm creating a job called Chief Transformation and Innovation Officer." And and what she told my wife was that she wanted me to work at 50,000 feet and turn me loose and build new kinds of relationships for the university. We worked hard on digital literacy improvement. We
Mhm.
introduced artificial intelligence. We introduced a lot of programs like UX design. that was unknown in that place. And these were young women who came from really tough backgrounds. Um, some didn't have a computer in their house or a mobile phone or an
Hmm.
internet. Um, so there were stories that we could do a whole podcast about. And this for me was tremendously rewarding. And I got to do the same sorts of things I was doing, leveraging my network, helping to bring new kinds of thinking in, working on artificial intelligence. We wrote a big grant from the government, which we got, that helped us with that. So to me, it just kind of felt like the context was different, but all the tools were the same. And I work with
Sounds
wonderful
amazing.
people. And I'm not Catholic. I'm not a particularly religious person at all. But I understood the meaning, the deep social meaning of helping people who didn't have the opportunities that I had. My parents didn't go to college either, and these were mostly first generation in the country and first generation college students. At the same time, I'd gotten involved in the community here. Um, I've always been in IDSA and the Design Management Institute. I've been on their boards. Um, but locally, I got involved with a number of organizations. First, Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. Um, you know, I was a design guy in town at a big company, and I was invited to be on the board, and I did that for a long time. I learned about College Possible, that helped
Hmm.
young people who were underserved find their way from middle school and high school in through college, and coached all the way through, and got involved with them. Um, I was introduced to the Penfield Children's Center that helps poor disabled children. And again, it's the same stuff we do as designers, but applied to these places that really need it, really need help in different sorts of ways, and brilliant people on their boards. So I don't know, when I decided that I was done with academia in a certain way, I rejoined the board of Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. Um, and I'm actually chairing the academic affairs committee. Go figure. Um, my high school teachers, if they're still alive, are rolling over. Um, anyway, I decided that my next career step was going to be working strictly as a creative leader in areas that had social impact. And so there's these three organizations I'm focused on: the
Hmm.
Children's Center, College Possible, and MyAd. I mean, to begin, I'm in my first year of, you know, nobody paying me, and decided to become a free agent. uh, People have been asking me to, come and do projects and do work, and things that you know, as a friend of mine said, when he stopped his corporate life, he wanted to do things that he liked with people he loved. And I so far haven't done anything for money. Uh, the stock market's been good, and I save my pennies. My kids are off my payroll, so I can afford to do things like this for a while. We'll see how
Yeah,
long that lasts. But right now, that's my focus, and I'm just kind of stretching my wings in this area and seeing how I can be helpful in the community in the ways I described.
sounds amazing. It sounds, yeah, super fulfilling, and you're in a really really good place in life and your career. So that's wonderful. We're going to wrap up with some quick fire questions, Bob, because we're over the hour mark. But it's like I've said a few times, we could talk for hours and we'd still just be scratching the
Episode 2.
surface on your yeah. Perhaps we'll revisit it after after a year or two and see how you're getting on and the amazing impact that you're having. But just some quick fire questions, Bob. Just say the first thing that comes to mind on these. So, fastest way to lose credibility with an engineering team as a design leader is?
Make it about them, helping them understand their why.
Yeah. Fastest way to lose credibility, or is that how to gain credibility?
Make it about yourself. Be arrogant.
Yeah.
Not deliver on your promises. Not meet them where they are. Learn to
Yeah.
speak their language, not just your own. I'll stop
Awesome.
there.
One thing you always look for in a senior hire that most job descriptions fail to mention.
Um, their ability to work with and influence people, um, what they know about love, what they know about um, that people that they're managing are human beings with lives outside of work, and being
Amazing.
caring and demanding at the same time. That's probably
Love
the
it.
key.
Yeah, absolutely. A physical product you think is quietly world class and does not get enough credit?
Oh, I need a couple of minutes to think about that. You know, I think about when you ask me that, I don't think about the modern stuff. In fact, I just finished being the first part of being a juror on the IDEA Awards. For 10 years, I helped to proctor those. I could never be a
Mhm.
juror, but I finally am a juror. I'm going to go to the Henry Ford Museum uh, in next month and do the live jurying part. I had 123 things. Those are all great. There were some wonderful breakthroughs there, but I think about things in history that are unbelievably beautiful and serve their purpose, like airplanes and cars that I love. The Lockheed Electra airplane, look it up, beautiful. The Constellation airplane, beautiful. And you know, people think of them as historical objects, but as
Mhm.
expressions of design, and where form followed function. Um, Beautiful. I mean, those are the kind of examples I think of when I want to inspire myself. I don't
Yeah.
necessarily look to now. I look in another world. I either look
Mhm.
backwards for inspiration. Um, there's a book by Stephen Johnson called "Where Good Ideas Come From." Nothing is new, and he
Yeah.
shows the sequence of how products have been developed over centuries. You know, the printing press came from the wine press, and you know, weaving machines came. You know, Jacquard looms invented computers. I mean, those are the old original, you know, basic ones, and that wasn't a quick fire answer.
No, it wasn't, but I enjoyed it 'cause, one of my favorite books is about the origin of words. It's called the Etymologicon. And it's like the author's talking to you in the pub, and it just rambles on from one word to the next, but in a really entertaining way. And I imagine I'd quite like that book as well. So that will go on the list. The next one, the design thinking practice most organizations implement badly.
Oh. Um, okay, so the way I would try to answer that is I went to a Design Management Institute conference in Amsterdam once, and I was on a panel, and there were a number of large European companies. Um, Two of them were car companies, German. You get the
Mhm.
picture. And they had finally gotten permission to start using design thinking tools, but um, it was all kind of based on how you produce a spreadsheet, and and that was what the company demanded. It was about the columns and rows, about the data, and they didn't get the chance to sort of breathe into meaning and purpose. And while they
Mm.
did, the company wouldn't really allow them. Um, and that was the wrong way to implement design thinking.
Great answer. Um, and then the final one, the question you would wish someone had asked you earlier in your career.
Um, what's my why?
It's a great interview question as well, isn't it? It's what? Do you mind if I ask you that now? What is your why?
Well, I think it probably in the story that I told you last. My
Yeah.
why is about how can I use the things I've had the privilege to learn and the experiences I've had the privilege to help others who need it more than I do.
Mm, love it. It's a really
Hence the
nice way to,
social impact work that I'm doing
yeah.
now, and helping them with their strategic um, development in a context where, at least in this country, the federal government has changed a few
Hmm.
things, and
Mm.
that's another podcast.
That is a very different podcast. Yeah, I like my travel to America, so we'll keep the politics out of it for the time being. But yeah, Bob, it's been absolutely amazing having you on the show. For anyone that wants to follow you or kind of wants to reach out and get in touch, what's the best place to find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. There's probably a lot of
Yeah.
Bob Schwartzes, but you can figure out how to find me.
That's test one. Yeah, but we'll make it a bit easy. We'll put the
If you
link in
wanna,
the show notes.
I hesitate to publish my email address because then you get a lot of solicitations you don't want. But LinkedIn
Yeah,
is always a great way for everybody to communicate. In fact, I think that's initially Claudia Glasser reached out to me via LinkedIn.
she did. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So a big shout out to Claudia again. But yeah, Bob Schwartz, really, really good to have you on Y Design. Thank you so much for giving up your time. And yeah, we'll put all the notes, all the recommendations in the show notes as well. And yeah, look forward to catching up soon.
and it was my honor.
Thanks for listening to Y Design. If this episode gave you some new ideas, share it with someone in your team who'd find it useful. And follow the show so you don't miss what's next. And if you're building a product team or looking for your next challenge in design or engineering, that's exactly what we do at Kodu. We help companies hire smarter and faster and help great talent find work that actually fits. I'm Chris Whyte. Connect with me on LinkedIn and let's keep raising the bar for design leadership. Until next time, stay curious, stay creative, and keep asking why design.